Welcome to the Create Your Story podcast, with conversations on creativity, self-leadership and personality to inspire and support your wholehearted life. I'm Terry Conlon, author, creative transition coach, teacher and personality type practitioner. Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to pay my respects to the Dharawal people, the traditional custodians of the land where I'm recording this podcast, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of lands across Australia and to elders, past, present and emerging. You can find the episode show notes, your free copy of Chapter 1 of my book, Wholehearted Self-Leadership for Women in Transition, and lots more information at quietwriting.com. Now settle back and enjoy today's show. Welcome to episode 2 of the Create Your Story podcast. This is a recording of conversations from the first Wholehearted Virtual Book Launch event just after Wholehearted was published on the 6th of September 2021. Being in lockdown when the book was published, all the initial events were of necessity virtual. It was an opportunity to connect with people who've been on the journey with me in various ways. So in this episode, I'm joined by Penelope Love, who received the very first long draft of Wholehearted and helped me to take that draft into a form able to be submitted as 2 books for publication. Penelope is a publisher, speaker, and winner of the International Book Awards as an author of Wake Up in Love. And she is also an incredible editor and partner in the book writing process. We chat about bringing the books to life together in an accessible and sacred way in this conversation today. I'm also joined by Kirsten Pilz, who has been a fellow traveller on the writing and creative solopreneur journey. Kirsten is a published author, former academic with almost 20 years university teaching experience, a TEDx speaker and yoga teacher. She's a retreat leader, and I've had the pleasure of joining Kirsten on a writing and yoga retreat in Hoi An, Vietnam in 2018. We talk about the value of retreat and how this time was a really important part of my writing journey with Wholehearted, though it took me quite a while to realise it in hindsight. We're also joined in this conversation by Natasha Piccolo, who is a fellow author at the Kind Press with her new book, The Balance Theory, which is forthcoming next year. We chat about so many aspects of Wholehearted the book and Wholehearted living, writing, editing, long-haul creativity, retreat, personality. I had so many tingly moments listening back to where we really touched on some heart-filled and deep aspects of writing truth and life. In the show notes, I share links about where you can find out more about my book, Wholehearted, and the Companion Workbook, as well as more about our guests, Penelope and Kirsten. The great news, too, is that there are solo episodes coming up with Penelope, Kirsten, and Natasha, where we dive deeper into their stories, their writing, and how they've created their story. I hope you'll enjoy listening and that you'll gain some insights to help guide your life, especially if writing and creativity are a really important part of it. Enjoy listening. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me for the first virtual book launch of Wholehearted. It's fantastic to have you here and all people who have been on the journey in some way, shape or form, writing family, readers, advanced readers, connections on Instagram. So thank you so much for being part of the journey. It's a real honour to have you here. So first up, I'll share what we might track through as we go through the session. First of all, welcome to 2 special guests who are joining me today. Penelope Love, who's been my editor all the way through, received the first very large 100,000-word draft and has been on the whole journey with me as my editor, particularly shaping 1 book into 2, which has been incredible. So great to chat with Penelope. And Kirsten also has been on the journey for a long time with me. Both are co-authors of Wholehearted Stories on my Quiet Writing website. And we've connected in lots of different ways, I think, through social media initially. I went to a writing retreat with Kirsten in Vietnam, which was just a beautiful way to, I think, get in touch with my writing self. So we'll explore some of those particular touch points. First of all, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the book, just briefly, as an introduction for those who may not know it so well, and about what it covers, why I wrote the book, how it fit in my life. And then I'll have a conversation with Penelope and with Kirsten about their roles and also about Wholehearted generally. They've read the book, so they can share some thoughts about that. So first of all, what is Wholehearted? Why did I write it? Where did it come from? So the book Wholehearted Self-Leadership for Women in Transition emerged from my journey. So I went on a transition journey, deciding what to do with my life, and realised that I didn't want to stay on the path that I was, which was working for 30 plus years in a government organisation in the technical further education system in Australia. And I started to make a path from that. But as I was going through, I found it was really important for me to write about it and to start to shape the journey in a writing sense. So as well as going through it, I felt the need to capture it. And my why was very much about helping me to write and make sense of what I was going through. But it was also about supporting women to develop self-leadership in their own lives, because I think, particularly if you're making change, particularly midlife, but at any time in life, there's not a lot of guideposts for us or ways to support us for going through that change. So I thought I'd share with you my notebook from 2017 of how it started. So there you go. There's a lovely mind map of the first ideas of what Wholehearted might look like. Mm. And then there's another page of a summary, and I was just looking at it. That's sort of the chapter summaries, which actually is what it ended up looking like. Chapter 4, chapter 5, the thing that got fleshed out was the Wholehearted self-leadership skills. But down the bottom here, there's 3 boxes that say the structure could be personal narrative, and application, and exercise. And that's pretty much exactly what it ended up being. So it's interesting that time, 4.5 years ago, thinking, here's all the things that I'm going through that I want to be able to put into a book. Here's how I want to help women. Here's what I'm learning. And through that, just knowing it was a mix of experiences. It was a mix of what I've learned from it. And it was a mix of how can I help you with those experiences. So in that 100,000 word draft, all of that was in there. So it was quite a big book. But when Penelope received the first draft, she wonderfully said to me, I think you've got 2 books here, which was like, oh my goodness. It was an amazing moment. So together with Penelope, we'll talk about that more in a moment, we went through and worked out which things belonged in the main book, which belonged in the second book. And the second book is a workbook, much more practical. So we teased out those aspects. And that journey of writing 2 books at once commenced. But the focus was on the main book, first of all, but knowing that in the second book, we were tracking along with the main book, but then working out how the 2 came together. So it was like a whole, like a piece of marble, and there were 2 pieces in. And with wonderful help, we went through and pulled out the pieces and brought it.
How long is the final book, the main book? How many words?
The main book's about 75,000. And workbooks about 37,000. So there's still quite a lot of text in the second book. And what we worked on was bringing out the examples. You want to comment, Penelope, on what that was like, going through that, seeing the 2 pieces?
Well, sure. Today I pulled up our first initial conversations on email about the book just to refresh myself on the long journey and the initial steps of it. And what happened was, when I read your outline, it came back to me. It was 7 pages for this book. And it was so Terry, it was so thorough. And it was an experience in reading the journey, the outline itself. It took me on the full journey of the book. And I saw the one big section of the outline that I put a big circle around, and I said, this could be a book in itself. And, Terry asked, well, how do you know? And it's a very intuitive process, and I think it also is combined with, I've been editing books for 24 years, or I should say editing material for 24 years, books for about 17 of those. And I think it's just a matter of seeing so many books over the course of my career, and knowing when something is just too much for a single book, but I couldn't, and no one could deny how this material worked together. So it was a great initial run. And what I really loved about the process is that in the beginning, you could feel overwhelmed, or you could feel no pressure. And I took the no pressure approach. As I read through it, I just put a very large liberal highlight over areas that I thought were not the main book. And then I put it in Terry's court, and she was able to take that big highlighted section, start to see what I mean. And then I think the back and forth made it not overwhelming. If it's one person facing all of this task of having to sort through and say which is which, it's not. But it was a really neat little, like a tennis game. And we pulled together, or we pulled apart.
We did.
the two angels in the marble.
Yeah, we actually color-coded it. So I think you color-coded it first. So we had blue for the main book, sort of a pinky color for the workbook, and then there was another color for things that we thought didn't belong, but we also took the view that everything could be repurposed somehow.
It's true. It's true. And I also embrace that philosophy whenever I edit, that nothing is really ever wasted. And I knew that these little sections of text that didn't really fall into either book could be perfectly saved and archived for posts to help promote the book, or even the seed of a new book. So that's how, and when you treat it like that in the beginning, there's not pressure to do something with everything. It just puts a relaxation around the process.
Exactly. Thank you for that. So what the sort of shape that we ended up with that process was, you come into the book hearing about my experiences. So I start with my moment. Often with transition and turning points, there's a particular thing that happens in your life, and many of you may have experienced this, where, I'm not staying here, whatever it is, relationship, job, place of living, just a point in life. There's often a point, and in our Wholehearted stories on quiet writing, you see that again and again in the stories. Heidi's one, for example. She hears a voice saying, I don't want to do this anymore. And it's just this thing that often happens to us. For me, it was a particular situation in the workplace where I wasn't given a job that I thought I was a great fit for. Not a big issue, but in the context of that, it made me realize that I could no longer stay where I was. So it was a real turning point that took me down a fair way and then had to rebuild. So I write about that in the first part. And then I talk about that journey back. So what sort of toeholds and footholds helped me to connect back. Some major themes that helped me. So things like connecting with our passions and personality, knowing who we are, our body of work. And then there's 15 wholehearted self-leadership skills that are sort of the bulk of the book, but they particularly are just my learning on the journey, but also ways that people can also support themselves through any type of change or ongoing in their life. So I guess that's where that mix of sort of personal narrative and practicality comes from. You have read the book, so I don't know if you want to make any comments about how that comes together for you, just as a reader. That'd be interesting to hear, Kirsten.
Yeah, I mean, I thought on the one hand, there's the very organized, what is it in your personality type? The
INTJ, yes.
Yeah, the J, which is lovely. And then there's that interest in the tarot, which I just find so fascinating because it's not at all encouraged in these workplaces. And you and I both have been in education. And so I found that really fascinating, how that opened a new way of approaching yourself and your life through that emphasis on intuition and also tapping into the archetypes. And in fact, that is one of the more interesting results of reading the book, the shadow stories and so on. So maybe talk about that a bit more. Yeah.
So there is a chapter 8 is about the shadow side. And I just found as I went through my journey, there were a whole lot of things that kept cropping up and learnings about things like shadow career. So that's the Stephen Pressfield idea that we often, for example, be a writing teacher when we want to be a writer, be the roadie in the band when we actually want to be the musician. And it's often, write the PhD on something when we actually want to be that person. So, yeah, so it's a great insight into what might be in our story that we can amplify and tap into, and also what might be holding us back from that. Mm-hmm. So that's helpful. And then those other things like grief, envy. I talk about envy. And often when we feel envy or feel that strong jealousy of something or desire for it, if we can try and see that as a force for good rather than get sucked into the comparisonitis, that can be really powerful too. So there's actually quite a lot in that chapter. It was interesting how that sort of shadow side, I think, as you're working through anything, particularly when it's difficult. My mother had terminal illness and I was supporting her in that time when I was writing the book too. So it was actually written from a really challenging place as well. So it's important to honour those energies of life too.
And may I just ask a follow-up question with your emphasis being on wholehearted, and that's often also not at all where lead comes from in the workplace. Although I'm finding perhaps a little bit more, like my last boss was female and she's very much an intuitive person and also heart-centered. I was wondering, are you finding this maybe since you've left the workplace, which is now a number of years ago, has there been a shift with regards to that being a little bit more encouraged, or are you still a sole pioneer in that field?
Well, I think I've been lucky because of the coaching training that I did with the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, which is very much a female-led, heart-led community, that I've been more connected with that sort of energy. But I do think that more intuitive, receptive side of leadership is starting to come to the fore. It's probably still got a long way to go, but it's beautiful to be part of an organisation with Beautiful You, for example, that is female-led and is pretty much totally coming from that place and just feeling the difference. And I think, for me, that was a beautiful counterbalance from where I'd been before. So I think we've got a long way to go with that. But it was interesting to think about where leadership and self-leadership fit together. And the reason I was thinking about self-leadership was because of my experiences in the workplace and how that grew from that. So I think perhaps there's a lot of self-leadership to be done in our leaders, perhaps of all genders, to tap into that female, not just female, but the intuition side. Because I found when I was in the workplace, it was very damped down. Even though it was my strongest cognitive function, I tended to rely on the extroverted sort of things. So, yeah, no, it's a good question, but I think we've got a long way to go. Perhaps I might hand over to have a chat with Penelope further about our relationship. So that's just a little bit about the book, and we'll keep talking about the book as we go through. So to introduce Penelope more formally, this is her beautiful book, Wake Up in Love, her beautiful memoir that was published earlier this year. They're written over 16 years, Penelope, I think. And so a long writing journey like mine, but Penelope's publisher at Citrine Publishing, a writing mentor and editor. And as I said, Penelope received the draft and really helped me through that whole journey, and it's continued to be a point of contact and support the whole way through, for which I'm very grateful. So thank you for that. So what I'd be interested to explore with you, Penelope, is what did you see in Wholehearted when you first received it? We talked a little bit about that, but what was it like to receive it? I'm sure it was quite overwhelming. It was a long draft.
I made my initial comment that the outline itself was 7 pages. It's not, nothing is daunting, to a fellow IN something J, because my introversion lets me be, very quietly with these ideas, and I love it. So in a lot of ways, the more the merrier. But, I'd been following you on Instagram. I believe we met through a Susanna Conway challenge, something like that. And so when I received the manuscript, we'd actually done a get to know you call probably a year beforehand, or maybe 6 months. And that primed me to sort of watch you and watch your postings in a way that I probably wouldn't have had we not had that get to know you chat. And so when I saw the outline, it was like everything I knew about Terry in 7 pages. And I see the way her mind works. She's very, very good at collecting details and organizing them. And so I had appreciation for where she was going because I had been following her journey online. So that led it to not be so overwhelming. Another thing that I had done, and I can't remember, I believe this was before you handed me the manuscript. I enrolled in the Sacred Creative Collective. And so in between following you on Instagram and then enrolling in your Sacred Creative Collective and then receiving the outline and the manuscript, I thought, perfect. This is a textbook for everything I wish I could have gone deeper into during the Sacred Creative, but not in that interactive format. It was like part of it was in PDFs, part of it was in discussions, part of it was on Facebook postings. And so this book outline was, oh, great, everything's in one place. Now I get to help organize it. So it really opened my whole heart. It allowed me to do the work I do best. There's a fine line between shadow career and what you're supposed to do. And I know that somebody who has wanted to be a writer and a published author all my life, it's very easy to find yourself in the shadow career of editor. And I wrote about that in my own Wholehearted story. At the same time, I couldn't deny that I was meant to do this project. It was almost like a karmic fated sort of thing that it fell in my lap just before I went through a career transition. So the book itself became a guide for me, guiding me through the year I was editing it. And in the middle of the summer of the year 2020, when everybody was in COVID crisis of, what am I doing really with my life? This book was it was such a gem to be able to have that. Even though it wasn't in its finished form, I still had all the information and access, and I was using it actively. And as a publisher myself, I find that the books that are written from that place of experience that Terry went through with the transition from her job, from her career to her heart career, it vibrates that, it resonates that. So as I was reading this book, I was finding and fine-tuning my own career to make it more authentic and wholehearted. And I was finding most of the pieces are there, but during that period, I did find other aspects of esoteric interest that I like to study. And Terry's brave sharing about how she goes wholeheartedly into tarot studies, despite the taboo nature, gave me the permission slip to do the same thing when astrology came my way. And now I integrate astrology into my daily life and daily work in a way that I wonder, if I had not been reading Wholehearted, would I have embraced this?
And now Penelope is encouraging me to get into astrology. So see, it's that lovely sort of effect of, the things we do and the things we share really help us with that next step of the journey. So
yeah, and the spiral metaphor that is in her logo and on the cover of the book, I feel is, always really spoke to me. And the book helped give it meaning and more reflection. And I feel this is part of the spiral, we visit and we find more interest and we go deeper and deeper.
Yeah, in the structure of the book, that was in my mind too, of going big and then going a bit more detailed with the chapters. But yeah, that idea of layering the learning, like there's quite a lot of repeated stories and different angles in there, but it's sort of how we learn over time, and we learn in another way, and we go back to the same things, don't we? Like we repeat, we go back, and we're moving through. And that's to me what the spiral's about, is that idea of layering and learning and continuing. And I tried to build that into the book too. So I don't know if you had a sense of that as you were editing that, how that sort of energy fits with the narrative in the book.
It does. And what it taught me is that, when you get to this other sort of familiar place along the perimeter, but you're not the same as you were the first time you visited it, so you can go deeper.
Thank you.
I just had a question about the process, if I may, because I think that might be interesting for other writers. Because Penelope said when you sent me the first draft, which obviously I'm sure wasn't the first draft, I was just wondering how long did it actually take you to get to a point where you felt confident to send that to an editor? And then how long did it take for Penelope, the editor, to work with you to shape it into what you then send on to your publisher?
I've got my timeline here just to remind me. So I started writing properly in the first half of 2017. I think I sent it to Penelope in the middle of June 2019. And actually, I finished that first long draft when I went to Vietnam with you, September 2018. And then I didn't know what to do with it apart from just fix up the spelling. There was lots of editing, but it wasn't structural. And that's what I didn't know how to do. And that's when I reached out to Penelope, because I knew what I wanted to write, but I didn't know what to do next. I just didn't have the skills. And I think that's what I've really learned, is that power of collaboration and of reaching out to people to help. Most of that was pulling the two out, working out the two drafts, and then working on the first book. And then the second book I mainly finished by myself later with the Kind Press.
And this is a book, mind you, that had over 100,000 words in the first manuscript. Yeah. If somebody has a 50,000 word manuscript, then the process is not going to take as many months. Somebody asked me that the other day, how long does my book need to be before I send it to you? I mean, I've taken a book about 30,000 words and flushed it out. And then if books come in about 50 to 70, they generally stay around that. And then usually when they come in over 100,000, we're working at trimming them down, just as a practical matter of business. That was another consideration that I brought to the table for Terry was that if you put everything in one book, it becomes such a huge book. You have to charge a lot for it. And, this is a way that now there's 2 books and it becomes maybe more affordable. Somebody can get book 1 and then get book 2 at another time. So there's all these considerations that you make when you see things from that outside perspective, that when you're writing the book, you're not looking at it that way. Yeah. So again, another reason to bring in people with other skill sets, because these points of view help to make the project whole.
Oh, they do. And I knew it needed to be less, but I didn't know how. And then when you said it was 2 books, that made perfect sense. To be able to just take the more practical pieces made a lot of sense. So,
are they sold as a package or individually?
Yeah, you can individually, but like on Amazon, they package them up together too. You can purchase the 2, which is good. And in terms of working through, you can read the main book without the workbook, but everyone will be different. But the way I envisage is someone might read through the first book and then perhaps do another reading and go back and work through and do it in a detailed way. And starting a coaching program to collectively work through the book as a group, which I think would be a really nice way to do it, because, again, as it was a solo journey for me, and that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, it can feel quite lonely when you're going through big change. So I think even if people are working through the book, it might be really nice to connect around that journey and have those conversations, because just as I've learned from your stories and the other women's stories, we all learn from each other too.
And so that workbook essentially also could be used by a course facilitator for their own course. So it's like a resource, like a textbook, I guess, in a way.
Meredith Fuller did a lovely review, and she's a psychologist. She got an advanced copy. So she's actually been working through a client who didn't want to do psychological work via Zoom, who didn't feel comfortable because they're in lockdown. So she actually gave them the book, and the person's worked through that book at a time when they didn't feel able to have face-to-face consultations. So that's really interesting to hear. She said she sees it as valuable for individuals, groups, and
so that's beautiful feedback already from your book. That's something that is an amazing resource you've created.
I think so. And that was always how I saw it too, like it's got multiple uses. So what do you think Wholehearted offers women? You know it really well. What would you see Wholehearted offers women?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to it being born at this very time following the year of the pandemic and people really getting this chance to look at their lives and see, am I doing what I'd like to be doing? Am I in my shadow career? Or is there another step I can take toward getting out and living a wholehearted life where I have my own career that feels good to my heart, and every day I look forward to doing it because it's what I love. And so Wholehearted is a guide to that. Going in order is always an option, but there's so much that the book is so modular, and that's what I love. So a lot of people that I know over the course of my career, they like to open up to whatever page and see what they open to. And Wholehearted can almost be read almost kind of like a tarot deck.
Yeah.
You open and you see what chapter, and that very much could resonate where you are in your journey and what you need to work on now. I feel that because of Terry's connection with that esoteric system, that the book imbibes that and can even be used that way. So
that's a nice way of thinking.
Fun book to play with.
Yeah, so that's true, because there's that linear reading through, but there's also a bit like a tarot where you pull a card. There's a way of just engaging with what resonates at the time. And that's interesting because that's actually how I wrote it too, because I used NaNoWriMo, that 50,000 words in a month model, even though it wasn't a novel. And I actually had the outline. And then I'd do my morning pages, do my tarot, and then I'd tend to write with the structure in script where I felt drawn. So if something like envy was popping up, then I'd write about that because it was bubbling up for me. So it was very much written from that. Even though the structure was linear, the writing process wasn't particularly. Yeah, that's really interesting. Meredith in that article says, as an introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging female, INTJ, her work is well structured while enabling the reader to meander. So that's really nice. So thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. And thanks so much for everything you've done on the journey. It's been absolutely unbelievable having you there, and we've developed a really deep and close relationship from that whole journey too. So just so appreciative, and thank you. And we're going to do a lovely double up of me holding Penelope's book and Penelope holding mine.
And it will be here tomorrow. US, they shipped them out on Monday, but so I'm getting it Thursday. So as soon as I get that, we'll coordinate.
So Kirsten is a writer for Wellbeing Coach, hosts beautiful writing retreats, one of which I attended in Vietnam, yoga teacher, and is also writing a memoir just about to the end of the first draft called Falling Apart Gracefully, and shared some of those experiences in your Wholehearted stories. And so we thought we might talk about some of our touch points, Kirsten, particularly the retreat, the value of retreat, the Wholehearted stories, and the role of challenge in our lives. So I found when I went on that retreat, and it probably is only in hindsight, I did a presentation on personality and writing, and I looked at my whole journey, psychological journey, through the process of writing the book. And when it came to 18 and the writing retreat, I've put, writing retreat, Hoi An, Vietnam, and then introverted feeling, extroverted sensing, all these things that are not my strengths. And it was a time of my muse reconnecting and coming back. So obviously retreats are important to you and you lead them. What do you see as the value of retreat and incubation in the writing process?
So for me, actually, I went on my very first retreat when I had what I would call an emotional and mental breakdown. And I went to Thailand to a very hardcore Vipassana retreat with just locals. And afterwards, they said to me, look, for us, we do this every year. It was a lot of burned out housewives. And it's part of our spiritual growth. And I thought, how interesting. I had always thought, holidays should be, and we only get, 20 days of annual leave here in Australia. I think in the US it's even less. And I thought, I want to spend those days to do something really constructive with my life. I don't want to be sitting in a meditation room and just listening to my thoughts in my head. That's really boring and unproductive. So that was the time that opened my eyes to the fact that a retreat is actually a way to replenish yourself and to do really important inner work, going on an inner journey. Because my holidays had always been about exploring adventure, outer journeys. And so the value of that inner journey, and especially for a writer, because when we work on a project, like you said at the beginning, before you started recording, I believe, we're so focused on what we're putting on the page, but a lot of the information is subconscious and intuitive. And even as I'm writing my book now, I always give myself plenty of time when I just switch off, and that's when you actually connect with a lot of the deep messages of the book or the stories you want to write. So go for or go on an artist state, like Julia Cameron says. So a retreat, I feel, is a really important way to just slow down. First of all, slow down, disconnect from all the devices. A lot of authors, and I love that, are very active on Instagram, which is, of course, where we met and where you and Penelope just said you met via Conway, which is wonderful, but it is so distracting. So that often, when we just give ourselves that time, it doesn't have to be a whole week to go on a retreat. It's a time of replenishing, withdrawing. There's a book that came out last year by Catherine May called Wintering, The Need for Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. And it really just explores fully. And for her, it was also leaving a career and becoming ill, and then that period of resting and retreating and actually exploring what the value of that is, which is not valued in our society. I come from Germany. My father was really judgmental about me resting and retreating for almost a year during my grief time, because I wasn't, in his eyes, contributing anything to society. But you do, because you're actually replenishing from the core, and that's so important.
Yeah. This just to reflect on what you're saying, the reason it came up for me in thinking about that time of retreat was reading this beautiful book, The Writer's Process by Anne Jans, which I've written a post about recently. And she compares the writing process to bread making. And she talks about the muse and the scribe as two different mental processes, but she talks about bread making, but it's the muse that comes in when the bread's rising. You've got to let it sit. And I know it, in taking a long time, and just sat on my desk over there where the finished book is now, and it was like a piece of dough rising, and I had to integrate more experiences too and make sense of more things. Sometimes I think it's letting things come in, isn't it? It's that, integrating, allowing, receiving.
Yeah, and it's also sitting with the idea, because a book, unlike an article or blog post, is a long-haul journey. It's a marathon. And so to actually sit and have a whole week or even a weekend just to stay where you're not answering emails, where you're not worrying about mundane everyday things, where you're not even with your partner having conversations, whether they're good or bad, that you normally have. It's a luxury that you give yourself, but it's sort of essential. And also I found when we were on retreat in Vietnam, which is of course interesting again, because you're in a different country. So like you just said, your extroverted skills are suddenly on overdrive because there's so much visual and olfactory and whatever stimulation. But I find on a retreat, that is often also when, especially on my retreats, we do our morning workshop, and then we might go to the market and look at the colors, or as we did, drink freshly squeezed sugarcane juice. And often that's when things ferment and compost somehow deep inside. And then you go back to your afternoon session and something, unexpected comes out on the page. There's a freshness you wouldn't find just sitting in your office looking at your watch going, is the day over yet? Have I produced enough?
I remember we went to the markets and it was just an explosion of colour and smells. And I think often we get dulled down to sitting inside and not engaging with our senses. And then we cooked the meal from the produce and then we ate the food, and it was just a sensory experience. So for me, I think, and it's taken me a while in hindsight to realise that time is really important for allowing the work, but also allowing myself to just get back in touch with a broader range of myself, and from a personality perspective, some of those things that are not my natural bent, but which really enrich me. So thank you for that experience. It was a really important part of activating the muse in the middle of the journey.
Yes. And it gives you that distance also, especially going away, whether it's overseas or to another country or just out of your comfort zone, it gives you that beginner's mind's lens. Exactly. You're looking at things through fresh eyes. And I'm sure editors like Penelope would tell her writers, just let it sit and then come back with fresh eyes after you have some distance. And that's what a retreat can do as well. Beginner's mind.
So in your Wholehearted story, and I know your memoir is about really difficult times, going through grief experiences and challenge, and certainly my story, different story, but I guess the similar theme is that theme of going through difficult times and from that creating a positive outcome. So how do you see challenge and growth fitting? How does Wholehearted play into that, your book? Just interested to explore. First of all, when I met you, I thought, oh my God, there's somebody else on this similar journey, and you can actually give yourself permission to tap into that heart-centeredness. Like you say in your book, you were at work feeling like you're crying in the bathroom or something, and you feel when you then step back into your role, all proper again, you're leaving parts of yourself behind. And if you have a 30-year career like you did, mine was almost 20, I realized, and this is thanks to you, that I'm an introvert. I had always known, but I hadn't really consciously thought about how my work as a lecturer was actually forcing me every day to be an extrovert. So being able to, use that wholeheartedness as a path through life and giving myself permission and understanding why I would feel so exhausted sometimes, it came from being outside of my natural comfort zone, which is an introvert, which doesn't mean I'm shy or can't connect to people. It just means I have a lot of quiet time, quiet writing, connecting with myself. So I think the difficult times, those threshold moments when our lives become turned upside down, they also break us open to a different dimension of ourselves. And they force us, if we are in that sensitive, receptive mindset, to stop and to just stand still and say, what can I learn from this? What is this opening up inside of me? Because society teaches us to just power through grief and to armor up and to be strong. And like Brené Brown says, the really courageous are those who allow themselves to be vulnerable and to sit with the grief and to actually listen into it and to be present to all of those difficult feelings, rather than going, oh, let's just quickly numb ourselves, with some wine or run away from the feelings. So I think it's a moment of deep growth, of possibility for evolving in ways you possibly consciously couldn't achieve in the same sort of impactfulness. Thank you for sharing that, and also how we connected and a sense of synergy along the way, because it does help. It's hard going through it. You can feel really alone. So to see others who are also forging a path, providing insights, tools, pathway such as you provided for me through your retreat too. I think we can all help each other grow and understand that, it's not easy either, that work. The other thing I talk about in the book is a piece you wrote about the role of luck versus hard inner work. And for me, there's certainly elements of luck in our lives, but I think we often can attribute too much to that and not realize just how much hard inner work it does take to deal with situations like this. It's a long process. So.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for bringing that up. I often, and I'm sure you probably get that too, when people say, well, how lucky are you that you have the time to write this book? Well, hello, I was retrenched. Or how lucky are you? People tell me to be writing a memoir. It's like, yeah, but I'm writing a memoir about losing the person I married, thinking I'd be married for them forever, and then finding out something that I didn't actually want to know, namely that he had a second life. So the lucky part is that I allowed myself to actually be open to what these difficult times have to teach us. I think that's the lucky part, that I'm not running away from it.
Yeah.
Or neither are you.
Yeah. But I think it's that decision to, when it's another transition, it's a turning point moment where you think, well, what am I going to do with this? And as I tell in the book, I reached out to other people. I looked at what they were doing. And that was when I started my blog a long time, like 2010. And for me, that was about finding my voice. Because writing was important, it was just a way of getting that back front and center out of fairly recent grief experiences to take me forward. So do you have any comments, Penelope, or questions?
I was relating very much to the retreat comments that you were making, Kirsten, because of the trip I just took. And my husband's been asking me, well, what exactly did you like about these places that we visited? Because he wasn't necessarily resonating in the same way that I was. But now I have a better answer for him. And it's this process that was occurring, It's not so much the streets of any one city that made me really love that city, but what I was loving, what was happening inside me when I was seeing something different that I've never seen before. So yeah, thank you for helping me put words on that, because that's, and I couldn't agree more of how important that is in the writing process, because when I look back, you speak about writing your memoir as a long haul and it's different from a blog post or an article. I once at the beginning of my journey had an editor say to me, oh, well, if you write enough articles, one day you'll wake up and realize you have a book. And that always stayed with me. And I never really thought, as I was writing the Love Life column that became my book, that it was going to be a book. But when I had that critical mass of articles, and I did start to see it, and then the weaving process of past articles, it becomes its own monster of a process. But what happened was that as I was living my life, I realized that when I went to India, when I first met my husband, and when I went to Costa Rica, these were the two places where the book really got started. And they were not on American soil. And there were lines and journal entries that became the foundational pieces of the book. And they were both from India and Costa Rica. So, had I not traveled, had I not journeyed, I would not have been able to tell this story of being on home soil. So it's very interesting, the retreat dimension. I love this very rich conversation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That process too with the blog for me, a lot of the pieces in the book began as blog posts too. So I think it's that finding a way to write and get your story out and find your voice in any way, shape or form, they can then become pieces in other places, just as the pieces that weren't in the book can become something that goes somewhere else. So I think what you're saying is really true about honoring that writing self in any way we can.
But that also ties in with something you say in your book, which is about the importance of having these networks, because it was actually very important for me, like when I found Susanna Conway, who started also because of her grief journey, and then you, Terry, it's like, oh, I can give myself permission to write this. It's actually like for a long time I thought, well, what happened to me was terrible for me, but really I didn't experience genocide. I'm not a female in Afghanistan, it's not that bad. But I think the networks are really important to actually validate. Any story is important, any story of profound transition. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's what I've loved about the stories of Wholehearted living, and I've just gone through and read them all again, putting them into one document to look at the next step with perhaps publishing them. And it's incredible how, like, the themes in there are in my book. I think the first story, Catherine Bell's, prompted your story, Kirsten. So it's like all the stories and experiences prompt each other's voices to feel a bit freer and to feel a connection. And one of them, one person writes a letter in response to Heidi's stories. So I think that whole importance of women's voices and stories and sharing and working collaboratively. But one thing I've learned, and I mean, if you look at the acknowledgements of my book, you think writing is a solitary experience. And then when you stop and think all the people and all the experiences and all the, particularly the group experiences that helped me, group coaching and coaching myself, retreats, all of that was part of this rich journey. I know you said, Penelope, writing acknowledgements was so important to you in your journey too, that thinking back on who was part of it, who helped you, what made a difference. And I mean, there's still many, many more people I could have included, but I had to stop somewhere. But it just makes you realize writing a particular book is so collaborative and so important. So thank you both for being part of that journey. So just one last question for you, Kirsten. What do you think Wholehearted offers women, particularly around writing and creativity and those sort of aspects?
Yeah, I just thought, first of all, it gives you the permission, like we just discussed, to actually believe that you have a voice and that you have a legitimacy to tell your story. And I like that it is a personal story. So I'm following your journey, which is nice because you think I'm not alone. And it gives you very practical tools, namely the tarot. I'm aware of Susanna Conway. I have somebody in my community who, in fact, teaches writing via tarot cards, but I'm still dabbling in it. And I think that's a really interesting tool that I would like to explore further. And also, of course, the whole shadow work, the Jungian shadow work, and the personality type, which, for example, I used to teach in my work as an intercultural communications lecturer, but I never really thought about it so much with regards how it actually impacts my own personal life. And by reading about it in your book, that really opened up new ways of thinking, even of writing a character. Maybe I identify their profile before I create the character in a book. So I thought that was really helpful. And also the emphasis on writing, being a writer on a retreat. I get a lot of people who say, I want to be a writer. Penelope, I'm sure you know this. Everybody resonates with this. We want to write, but we end up in the shadow careers, imposter syndrome. So I think that's really helpful also in your book, that you show people that you are a writer just by writing morning pages, for example, every day. It doesn't matter whether they end up anywhere or whether you get accepted to the PhD program at Wollongong University. You're still a writer. And I think that's a really strong message of encouragement.
Thank you. That's beautiful. It's lovely to hear the particular areas of focus that resonate with you. And that also, we had a lovely conversation when I was writing with Beth this morning and another lady co-writing. We were talking about the long haul writing and the word tenacity came up. And Beth was saying it's very much about tenacity, but it's about realizing that everyone just starts an ordinary writer and you just keep sticking at it and going through to be extraordinary. But anybody can do it, was what we're saying. We all have different talents, but it's very much about, by sticking at the process, what we can bring to it as we go through. So
yeah, and that's it. I just wanted to say, because you're a very organized person and disciplined, writing a book does take discipline, because there is that, like Liz Gilbert says, there's the fantasy of the artist, and then there's the artist and the writer who, like her, sits down and she says, I like my farmer parents, every morning at 6:00 and I write. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because the other lady we were writing with was asking questions about how long it took and what the process was like. And she said, tenacity, it takes tenacity. And we went, oh, yeah, that's a good word. It does. Thank you so much. So have you got any questions at all, Natasha? Or comments?
I just want to congratulate you. I really enjoyed hearing your process. And it's amazing, like being a young writer, I'm only just 30 and having a book out next year. It's amazing to learn from somebody who has been writing for years, almost double my time. And it's beautiful because it gets me very excited for my career.
Oh, thank you so much. That means so much to me. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm excited to be able to inspire you, because I know people inspired me too when I was younger. And I think we all need that inspiration to keep us focused on our dream, because it starts, like I showed with my book, it starts as that sort of mind map or that
Yeah, I really resonated with that because my book, I started writing it when I was 20. So it's been literally a decade. And I've got probably 20 journals and scrapbooks and brainstorms and like a whole archive from the last 10 years that it just made me really excited to release my baby next year.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
What's your book?
The Balance Theory. So it looks at the idea that the only universal goal that you can truly observe from cellular to cosmic is that the universe is attempting to balance itself.
It's a non-fiction book?
Yeah, narrative non-fiction. Very similar process. So clinically, I'm a speech pathologist. So a lot of my understanding of this concept has come through my clinical work over the years, but in my personal life, there was a lot of loss, grief, trauma that was basically mirroring the lessons as I was going through it clinically with clients. So there's that marriage of science and spirit, which is what the whole book is about.
Beautiful. Yeah, I write about that a bit in the postscript, how those things are coming together. It's like consciousness, the map of consciousness work of David Hawkins and that sort of energy work, things coming together. So that would be a really challenging book to write too. It
was a beautiful process though. It was channeled. So I did it through meditation. I would meditate. And there was one big meditation that came through as the Divine Nine. So there was 9 chapters. And that's what the proposal was based off, that meditation. And after 10 years of scribbling ideas in journals for a very long time and actually not forming a manuscript, I went, that's what it is. It's the Divine Nine. And now I've got to work backwards and go from that point. So just this morning, I finished the first full draft. So that will be sent to Natasha at the Kind Press today.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and she's a beautiful person to receive your work. She's just been amazing. Yeah.
She's a dream.
Yeah. No, I've been very blessed to have Penelope with the developmental editing and then Natasha and her Kind Press team with the next step of the journey. She's incredibly supportive. So, that's very exciting. We'll be fellow writers in the stable.
Yes.
Excellent.
May I ask a final question about your writing process? So developmental editing with Penelope, did you have somebody also who did your line editing or was that done by the Kind Press?
So
like typos, you
want to answer how you saw your part, Penelope? Because I'm interested because it wasn't just developmental. We did far more than that too, didn't we?
Yeah, that's the thing. When you're working with someone like Terry and you have that soul connection, it's really hard to separate the developmental part from the detailed part. Mm-hmm. And so, especially because that process of finding voice and not really finding it, but fine-tuning voice, it goes hand in hand. So I would say we were able to work that process almost simultaneously. And then at the end of the developmental process, we were relatively confident that when it was going to the Kind Press, that it would only really need a polishing over.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with Terry's willingness to be involved at that level in the process. Not every writer works that way. Some people just want to get it on paper and then I'll worry about the lines. Then I'll worry about, does this paragraph merge into this one? Fine. But Terry and I were able to do that work along the way.
And once we got the shape right, we then worked through chapter by chapter and we did the moving things around and sometimes bits move. But at that stage, it was much more about the content within that chapter. And then the draft that went to the Kind Press was a strong draft because it had been through all that editing. And then the editing team, and Natasha hands on edits as well. And she has another editor who is very skilled and has worked with a lot of the top houses too. So I've been really honoured to work with some incredible people. And I wanted to independently publish. That was always my choice. So, for me, it's been a really great fit and a great journey. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. So, thank you for coming live and being here. It's been really lovely. So, I've popped in that review just because it was such a lovely one. It's the first review. It's by Meredith, who is part of the psychological type community. It's been lovely to have people such as yourselves, Penelope and Kirsten, who know me and know the book and get it. But then others like Meredith who haven't been as closely involved. She knows me through the Psychological Type Network, but her review is really beautiful about how it fits with coaching and client work. Mm-hmm. And also she understands personalities, like as being a personality person. So she highlights that too, that link between structure and meandering, which I was conscious of as I was writing, but it's lovely when someone reflects that back to you. So that's really very kind of them. There's book club notes. So if people who are working through book clubs, I've created some book club notes and some coaching opportunities coming up, walking people through the book as a whole in a coaching space. So how do you think that would be? I'm interested in your comment.
That is definitely what I will be doing with the balance theory.
Is it?
Absolutely. Like just from the structure, it's because it's teachable learnings. As a coaching module, it works well. And I think that your book is very similar in that structure, very tangible.
Yeah. And it's one thing to read a book and do the activities, which again, sometimes people will intend to do it, but it's hard to get the time. So another thing too is that structure helps create the time to do it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So they can work through it as a week-by-week program.
Terry, I think it's going to be amazing because the Sacred Creative Collective was almost like an early incarnation of what's possible. Mm-hmm. I think you'll find it probably a lot easier as a leader of such a collective.
Yeah.
Now you have this resource.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I appreciate that feedback. Awesome. So any other questions or comments before we close?
I have one comment. Yeah. I just wanted to say, Natasha, it's so nice to meet you. We connected on Instagram, and this is almost a rare opportunity to meet somebody that you've connected with in a more live way. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you too.
Look forward to connecting over our posts in the coming years.
Definitely.
Yeah, great to connect with you too, Natasha. It's exciting you're getting to that stage with your book, and keep in touch. So.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much, Penelope, for everything and for joining today and for being so beautiful
too. I didn't mean to overlook. It's just that I feel almost like a colleagueship that we've had through the Wholehearted stories, and Natasha's completely new in my life. But I'm going to make sure that I'm also connected with you on social media and refresh myself on your story and stay more connected with you as well.
Thanks so much, Kirsten, for coming and being part of it and for all your support over the years too. Where Write Your Journey and Quiet Writing have been very much kindred souls.
In parallel, that's right.
We're connected in Sydney, totally synchronistically. We were in Frankfurt at the same time and then in Vietnam. So we've had lovely in-person catch-ups.
And now we're all grounded in Australia.
Really remarkable. Yeah. When you think about the chances of that, that's amazing.
It was amazing.
That's some really aligned stars there.
Yes.
Thanks so much for being here and for being part of the bunch.
Good luck with your next one. Have fun and enjoy the moment.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
That's love.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today, and I hope you found it inspiring and supportive. You can find the episode show notes, get your free copy of Chapter 1 of Wholehearted, and find out more about my books, coaching, and other offerings at quietwriting.com. Connect with me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I am at Writing Quietly. Please leave a review on your favourite podcast app too to help others find the show and create their story. And warmest wishes for you as you create your story in the world.